All right. So this is welcome to the first of the series of Hello World workshops where we're going to be teaching kind of beginner skills and getting started with web development and hopefully some other subjects down the line. Today is the essential tools meeting, and there's no slides. I'm going to walk you through installing all of the different software that a web developer might need and kind of get you more comfortable with doing the kinds of things you're going to need to do to just get set up and be able to participate in a lot of our other workshops. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to start by walking us through the installation on Windows, but then I will walk you guys through it on Mac. And then for the one person who's on Linux, if you want to hit me up on the chat, I can help you out there. Or if you already know what you're doing for the most part, then that's fine too. So can we see this screen share? Yes, okay, cool. So this is, I've just freshly installed this, this copy of Windows here. So if you have a copy of Windows 10, everything should work out fine. If not, it's likely some kind of issue with your installation of Windows. But with any luck, if you just follow along with these steps, everything should work out okay. The first thing we want to do is grab an editor. So Windows actually comes with a built-in editor for writing code. Well, not for writing code, but you have a built-in text editor called Notepad. And you may have used this before, right? You can just kind of type text into it. But this is not the best editor for coding because programming editors usually have nice features. Like they'll highlight your syntax for you, like to have pretty colors, project management, and other integration with your terminal. And they have other useful features. So while you can, I've known some people who were very good programmers who wrote all of their code in Notepad. It is not what I would recommend. So there's a variety of different editors you can use, and it's definitely a preference thing. So there are people who like all kinds of different things, but the one I'm going to recommend tonight, if you have no preference or you don't have any other editors right now, I'm going to recommend Visual Studio Code. So if you just go ahead and Google Visual Studio Code, or in this case, I'm on Bing because I'm just on the default here, you can grab that. You just want to go to this first URL, Visual Studio Code, and go ahead and grab this stable build for Windows. It's a pretty straightforward install. So it's going to download. You can either save it and then run it or just run straight away. That might take a minute to download. Visual Studio Code is actually relatively new. It came on the scene. I remember when it came on the scene. It wasn't that, I think it's within the last 10 years for sure. And I want to say it's become popular in the last 5 or so. And so it's become really popular. And it's almost to some extent like a standard these days. So if you go on YouTube or other learning platforms, I know UCF has LinkedIn Learning, which is great for learning a lot of technology related stuff. And if you want to see what the people on those videos often use, they often are using Visual Studio Code. It's that popular. So that's why I recommend it. But I don't personally use Visual Studio Code. I use Vim most of the time. And I've used Eclipse in the past. Sublime Text I know a lot of people use. Atom is another one. So there's a lot of different text editors you can go after, or IDEs. You have your option of what you want to take. So if you have something else that you prefer, by all means, go ahead and do that. In terms of these options, I'm going to create a desktop icon, and I want to go ahead and register all of these integrations with Windows. They're not strictly necessary, but I would go ahead and click those. And then we're just going to go ahead and hit install, and it'll take a minute or two. While that's going on, the next thing we're going to need to grab is Git. So if you were at my Git workshop at Night Hacks, fantastic. You can kind of sit back for a minute. If not, oh, Visual Studio Code finished. Great. Okay, if not, you're going to want to go ahead and grab Git. So Git is your version control. So VS Code is just our editor, right? That lets us type out our code. That's basically what it does. Type code, save code. Very simple. Git is like Google Drive for code. It lets you manage your manage the versions of your code. So it's called version control software. And the reason you want to use it is so if you have bugs, you can roll back to a version that was working. It helps you collaborate once you become more skilled with it. And it also has integrations with GitHub as well. So we're going to go ahead and grab Git and make a GitHub account. But let's just start with grabbing Git. So on Windows, you're going to want to head over here to this download. Let's do that. Go ahead and run that installer. By the way, if anyone has any questions throughout this or you're getting stuck on anything, please put something in chat so I know. Okay, you have the Git GUI installed. So I'm going to, when we go over Git, I'm going to probably go over the command line. So if you ever see, if you're not familiar with GUI or GUI, that's a graphical user interface.
Yeah,
So that's
I got that.
Sorry, what's that?
Just wondered if it also included the command line interactions, since I've only been using the GUI.
Oh yeah, no, I'm definitely, that's actually, I've never actually used a GUI for Git because I learned it on the command line and I just have never bothered to learn the GUI before. And I know for certain there are limitations to a GUI. There's reasons why people use a command line interface instead.
Sure.
But anyway,
is it do I have to go and re-download Git?
Did you install it from the Git SCM site or how did you? Yes. Tell you what, why don't we, we'll be able to check right after this if through VS Code if we had it installed correctly for this. My guess is yes, because I bet the GUI uses this in the background to like make it work. But if not, you can reinstall it. I'm not super certain exactly again how you have that set up, but most likely it will work on the command line as well.
Well, thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So yes, we want to allow this to make changes. But yeah, I definitely recommend learning the command line version of tools. We can kind of click through. Oh, okay. For this setup, I would, this bottom checkbox, if you're following along, check daily for Git for Windows updates. Always good to be in the latest version. So yeah, I would check that. That's a good folder. That's fine. Okay, this one's also important. Choosing the default editor used by Git. So by default, Git will use Vim to write commit messages and for other editor related things within Git. Like I use, this is actually where I learned Vim. And so like that would be fine. Like that's fine with me. But if you kind of read what it says here, the Vim editor, while powerful, can be hard to use. Its user interface is unintuitive and its key bindings are awkward. I guess I'll agree with that. It's definitely powerful. Like I enjoy using it. It has a lot of cool features, but if you're just starting out, it's definitely, there's a learning curve to it. It's not like Notepad. If you try to start typing in Vim, it will not start typing. It has like a bunch of modes and things. So we're going to go ahead and change that over to Visual Studio Code. So if you go to this dropdown, head to Visual Studio Code, you can use that. If you're not using Visual Studio Code, this is where you would put something else, obviously. So you could pick up Notepad here, Sublime Text, Atom, VS Codium. There's all kinds of other different things. And you can also set up a different editor if you have some other one that's not listed here. But we're going to go with Visual Studio Code because that's what we're setting up today. And go ahead and hit next. This is kind of interesting. I'm just going to delve into this briefly. So adjusting the name of the initial branch in new repositories. Don't worry if this is all confusing, like what this option really means. But basically, by default, in Git, you have one branch. And you can branch your code into many branches later on. That branch has always been called master, but recently some people have found that term to be offensive. So there is kind of a push to start moving that to other different, some people call it main, trunk, or development. So if you want to override that and put it as something else, you can. For now, the default for the whole project is still master. And so I would stick with that just for compatibility reasons. But that is something down the line could potentially change. Adjusting your path, we can leave this on the recommended, that's fine. You can leave that on the default, that's fine. This is kind of confusing. So one reason a lot of developers prefer to use like Mac OS or Linux over Windows is because you have a lot of incompatibilities. And one of these is actually the way that text files save the line endings. So when you hit enter, if you've taken an intro programming class, you might know that like a return character or a new line or an enter would be represented with a /n. But on Windows, it's actually in the encoding is represented as /r/n instead of just /n. And because it's different between Mac OS, like Mac OS and Linux do it with just /n, and Windows does it with /r/n, that you have a kind of incompatibility that things don't always work well. So that's what this option is doing. There's some different options. If you just leave it on this default, check out Windows style and commit Unix style. That's totally fine. You might, for some reason, want to change it to one of those. But if you just stick with this, that's why you have this option. If you're on Mac OS or Linux, then you won't have anything like this you need to worry about. You can use that terminal. That's fine. Choose the default behavior of git pull. I would say switch to only ever fast forward. That is a personal preference, and I have good reasons for doing that. If you were at my Git workshop, you probably know what those are. When we go over Git, I'll try to explain why I usually do that. But you can always change any of these options later as well. This is just, since we're setting it up the first time, might as well set it up correctly. But that's the option I would prefer here. We can use the Git credential manager core. That's fine. You can leave that as the default. You can leave that as default as well. Okay, so we're gonna have Git installing. And if you're on Mac OS or Linux right now, I apologize. I know it's probably pretty boring just watching me sit through these Windows installers. But the vast majority, we have 78% of people on Windows. So I thought it was important that we go through that. Also, even if you use one operating system, I think it's just a good skill to be familiar with them all, because you never know when you might have to work with different operating systems. So that's why I like Linux, for example. I see we only have one person who's like daily driving it. Maybe more of you know it. But at some point, I might run a Linux workshop, because it's a great skill to know how to use Linux, even if it's not something you want to daily drive. Okay, so we finished setting up Git. That's great. If anyone had any trouble setting that up, let me know. Okay, the next thing we're going to do actually is check to make sure that we have our Visual Studio Code and Git set up correctly. So you should have an icon here if you check the option for that. Otherwise, you can just type Visual Studio Code in here and get to it that way. But go ahead and fire that up and see. You should get a window that looks something like this. So if we kind of maximize this, and then what we want to do to check if Git is working correctly is go up here to Terminal at the very top and hit New Terminal. So that'll pop up. So this is if you take an intro programming class, you might have used like GCC for your C compiler or whatever. This is where you do that. VS Code has it integrated. You can also use it separately. But there is one tweak we need to make. So by default on Windows, it's probably going to use the PowerShell terminal, which is like your Windows terminal. But just to give compatibility across Mac OS, Linux, and Windows, really you want to be using Bash, because that's kind of like the standard terminal for servers and basically every other operating system. So if you head down here if you go to this little kind of drop down thingy and you click Select Default Shell, then you want to go up here and click Git Bash and let that be your default shell. So it might take a minute to run. But basically, once you set up that, if you make a new shell, so if you type this, if you click this little plus here, it should say bash, and you should get this different looking prompt here. It probably won't say Rob, because that's just because it's my username, but you should get something that looks like this. And Aiden, if you were at this point, if that didn't work for you, then like if you click this select default and Git bash wasn't an option, then you probably need to reinstall Git.
Sorry, can you tell me what that was again? That command to pull it up?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so all you need to do is go to Terminal, New Terminal.
Oh, okay, sorry.
And that'll pop up this thingy. And then go over here to this little drop down, select Default Shell. And then you want Git bash instead of, don't choose Command Prompt or PowerShell. And if that Git bash isn't there, you'll need to reinstall.
Oh, yeah, I have Git bash.
Okay, yeah, then you're good. Yeah, so my guess is the GUI probably uses the command line like behind the scenes. That's probably how it works.
Gotcha.
Okay, cool. Is anyone else running into issues with that? No? Okay, cool. Next thing we're going to want to do is create a GitHub account. So if you don't already have a GitHub account, I already have a GitHub account. So I'm probably not going to make another one. I don't want to like pollute their usernames. But all you need to do is head over. Oh, Git no longer supports this web browser. Ouch. Yeah. Also, if you're still using Edge, you probably should stop using Edge. Firefox or Chrome is really the way to go these days. Even Safari isn't always the best in terms of, especially for web development. So like, there's nothing wrong with using Edge or Safari just for like your daily web browsing. But in terms of compatibility for web development, you want to have access to like the latest standards and make sure that your compatibility with the latest JavaScript and HTML and CSS specifications is really good. So you want to be using Firefox or Chrome. But regardless, if you head over here to github.com and then you just go to sign up, or you can actually, I think you can just sign up straight up here, use an email, username and password. We're not going to get into actually using GitHub a whole lot. If you want to kind of jump ahead and learn about that, you can head. I have on our Night Hacks YouTube channel. If you just go on YouTube and Google Night Hacks, you can find it. I ran a Git workshop where I kind of talked about GitHub, how to use it along with Git in more detail. We'll probably go over that some more at some point in the spring. But that's having a GitHub account is just something you should get set up. So, but this is just a pretty standard account opening. You just need the email, username, password. Not too hard. So go ahead and do that if you don't already have a GitHub account. All right, the last thing that we need to install is Node.js. So if you just Google Node.js, and Bing actually did not get me to where I wanted to go. I believe, oh, it's this one, nodejs.org. So if you head to nodejs.org, and if you're on Mac or Linux, just keep waiting. I'm about to get you because it's the last thing we need to do. You want to download Node.js. You have two options. You need to grab this 14.15.0 LTS. LTS stands for long-term support. I know it says recommended for most users, but we're not most users. We're developers, so we don't need that. Usually, if you're running a server or something that needs to be stable, I would recommend grabbing the LTS version. But for development purposes, I would say try to stay as close to the latest as you can. So if you grab this 15.0.1 current latest features, you want to go ahead and install that. And as far as I know, I don't think this installer doesn't have too many options to it. Okay, if you are on Mac OS, you're one of my 4 people on Mac OS and you've been waiting patiently, what you want to do is head over to, and reminder, if you're on Windows, you'll need to do this. We're already done for Windows. You want to head to brew.sh. So this will help you. I install all of my stuff on Mac through Homebrew. And the reason for that is Homebrew works a lot. I actually learned Linux before I learned Mac OS, and Homebrew works a lot like Linux. And I just think package managers are the best way to install software in general. Okay, here's the Node.js installer for Windows people, so we can jump through that real quick. Yes, we're going to be grabbing npm and Node are the same. They're pretty tightly linked together. npm just stands for the Node Package Manager. So Node.js comes with it. They are technically 2 different things. You don't need to check this box if you're on Windows. Brew install npm. I have to check the command. I believe that will work. Okay, yeah, so Windows people, just click through that installer once you get that. Remember, you want to grab the 15. You want to go to nodejs.org 15.0.1, run the installer. Yes, allow it to make changes to your device. And then just click through. You can leave everything as the default. Yeah, so after we grab Homebrew, so to grab Homebrew, you want to, if you're on Mac, you're going to want to copy this right here and paste it into a terminal. So actually, let me screen share my Mac so you can see that. Okay, Node.js is successfully installed. Okay, great. So yeah, for Windows people, you should be doing good at this point. All right, hopefully people can see my Mac OS desktop now. So you're gonna wanna go and open the terminal app. So if you go here and then you want Firefox as well. or whatever browser you're using. Spotlight. Yeah, no, the problem is, okay, so the reason you're seeing me like struggling so much is I have my laptop set up directly in front of my larger monitor, so it kind of cuts off the bottom, so I can't actually see most of the icons, which is pretty annoying. Okay. I haven't used, I'll be honest, I'm not a Mac OS pro. I haven't used Mac for that long. So Spotlight, little search icon on the top right. Oh, this thingy? Oh, that's nice. I'll have to learn how to use that. Thank you for that, Arjun. Okay. Yeah, like I said, I use Homebrew mostly because it makes me feel at home like I'm using Linux, which is what I use most of the time. So, okay, so we head over here to Homebrew. You want to grab, I've already installed it, so I'm not going to actually run this, but if you grab this and then let me actually try your, oh, that's very nice. Okay. All right, and then we just paste that into here. And then if you hit enter, actually, I probably hit enter, it's fine. Okay, it'll ask you for your password. So at this point, I'm not going to run it, but you need to run that. And that might take a hot second to go through. So for people who are on Mac, let me know if you're able to get that to work and when Homebrew gets installed. Because once you have that, it's very easy to install the rest of the stuff you need. Homebrew has like a wide variety of software you might need. So say you want to grab Visual Studio Code, right? If you just type Visual Studio Code Homebrew and then go to this Homebrew formula, then you can just copy this command and run that and you'll install Visual Studio Code in like a couple of seconds. So like I'll actually go ahead and do that now just so you can see. So copy this. By the way, if you ever see, so in your kind of journey of learning how to like do web development and write programs, if you ever see something with like a $sign in front of it like this, that means that you need to run it in the terminal. That's what the intention is. So if you're trying to, the $sign, that's like kind of like a universal, and it's not really well documented. You just kind of have to learn that from somewhere. But if you see something with a $sign in front of it, that indicates you're supposed to run it in a terminal. So you'll need to like type that in, or usually copy paste is the way to go, and then just hit enter. And it might take a second, but it will install. So yeah, so Visual Studio Code. And then after, if you want to install Git on Homebrew, it's an equally simple process. Brew install Git. So let's go ahead and do that. One thing, you probably don't need to actually grab Git though, because most Mac OS installations ship with Git already. So if you want to know if you have Git, if you type git space -- version, let me actually make this bigger so you can see it. Oh, I don't know how to make it bigger. Okay, well there's you can see it. That's fine. If you run git space -- version, and it actually does run. Okay, so if you see, you should have something like Apple Git or the View tab. Oh, Command plus. Yeah, I should have guessed that. Okay, thank you for teaching me Mac OS here on the spot. Okay, yeah. So if you have like a newer version of Mac OS, you should have Git already pre-installed. But if you don't, or for some reason, or you just really want to install it with Homebrew also, then you can do brew install Git. That's a great. And then if you want to get Node, I'm pretty sure it's like brew install Node or something. So yeah, you can see why I like doing it this way. On Linux, it's a very similar experience. You probably won't be using Homebrew, but you'll have a package manager that is has all the things you need. For my one person who is on Linux, whoever you are, you need help installing. It's better to install to get npm. No, you don't. Okay, so actually, if you read through this command here, brew install node is just an alias. It does the same as brew install node.js, brew install node at 15, brew install node.js without the dot, or brew install npm. So you can choose any of those, whichever one of those makes you happy. I'm going to do node, but yeah, people probably get them confused a lot, so they just say do all of those. But yeah. Anyway, in terms of like installing, I find that a much better experience than like trying to Google and download things on Windows. No, don't apologize for spamming the chat. You're totally fine. Yeah, Arjun is just complaining he's spamming the chat with all the messages. That's fine. Spam the chat. Okay, I'm Linux guy. It's all good. You're using Windows. Okay. Yeah, awesome. If you are on Linux, what distribution of Linux are you using or were you using? Ubuntu. Okay, yeah, that's the most popular one. Yeah, so that one you have a package manager that is you have the apt package manager. So I mean you can always type actually. Googling things is a great way to learn stuff. So yeah, Ubuntu install npm. So if you just want to learn how to do that, usually you can Google and find a tutorial, and it's just like run one command. Yeah, so sudo apt update and sudo apt install Node.js. It's very similar to the Homebrew kind of thing where you just kind of type the command and gets what you need, which I find very nice. But to check to make sure that we've got everything working, have all my Mac people been able to get this stuff installed, or are we still waiting on Homebrew to install? Nope, open up my other desktop. Okay. If you're able to get on Mac, get Visual Studio Code to open, and you see this Z shell here, then you're good. Z shell is basically backwards compatible to Bash, so it's more or less works the same way. Isn't Node notorious for being not up to date on Linux? So it depends which Linux you run on. There are some Linux is great because you have so many different versions. You don't need chocolatey, at least not for what we're doing today. If you want to install it, it takes a decent amount of time. If you want to install it, you may need it for some project you do in the future, potentially. But for the most part, it's not like a requirement. So you can skip it for now. You can always get it later if you need it. But back to, so we had a question isn't Node notorious for being not up to date on Linux? It really depends what version of Linux you're on. What's different about Linux compared to Mac OS or Windows is it's an open source operating system, which means anyone can copy and tweak the code. So what you have is you have like literally thousands, or maybe not thousands, hundreds of different versions of Linux. You can actually check. So if you go to DistroWatch, it's a great site for showing you all the different. So these are over here on the right. This is I find the most interesting. You can see kind of the different Linuxes that people look up, have been looking up on this site. So let's say you want to see like the last year, what have been the popular things that people have been doing. So MX Linux, I've actually never heard of that. But so this must be one version. A lot of them are based off of each other. So if you look here on MX Linux, you can see it's based on Debian stable. You have Manjaro. It's become really popular. It's based on Arch Linux. You really only have a handful of like different distributions that are like actively maintained. And then you have a lot of ones that are based on those ones that are like actively maintained. So it really depends. So Debian stable, for example, is notorious in general. If we go to Debian stable, it doesn't actually. But Debian stable is notorious for having old versions of software, like sometimes years old. It's kind of ridiculous. I would never recommend using Debian stable because most likely your software is going to be so outdated. It may be quote unquote stable, but it's going to be so old that you're going to find tutorials asking you to use features that don't exist on the 5 or 6 year old version that's available on Debian stable. Whereas you have other distributions like Gentoo or Arch Linux that literally build every day, build the latest version of whatever software exists, and you're always running like the absolute latest version of something, which can be good in that you always have the latest features, but bad in that you might run an update, restart your computer, and then Node no longer works, or not stable. You can run into issues with that. So usually a compromise is a good spot, especially for beginners. You don't want like ridiculously out of date software, but you don't necessarily want to be on the bleeding edge unless you know how to fix the problems that can come along with that. There's a comment in the chat that software, like 5 or 6 year old software, doesn't have support anymore. They're actually, a lot of times they do. So Debian's table, for example, they usually pick a version of the Linux kernel. So every Linux distribution has a Linux kernel that runs underneath it. And they actually pick a version of the Linux kernel like 3.18 or something. And then they camp out on that version for like a decade. But they actually have teams of people who work, they look at all the latest changes that are made, and they say, we don't care about the new fancy features that might break things, but if there are security updates or bug fixes, the important stuff, they do a lot of work to backport that all the way to the older versions of the kernel. So everything should work. You should be secure and up to date. But in terms of features, you usually don't have those. Oh, okay. And then there's a comment that oftentimes they don't have free support. Usually they do have free support for several years. Well, in terms of software support, if you want like enterprisey support with like where you like phone call center, you can call someone and get help. Yeah, that's you usually do have to pay for something like that. Okay, yes, and I see someone has to go. That's totally fine. This is being recorded. It'll be posted to YouTube within the next few days. We basically covered most of the install process. At this point, I'm just gonna, if there's anyone who has anything they need to catch up on in terms of getting things installed, if anyone had trouble with getting any of that installed, please talk in the chat now. Otherwise, we're gonna go over some basic bash commands because that's something that everyone should know how to do. At least every software developer should know how to do. And then that will be all for this week because I know people want to kind of follow the election or do whatever else they want to do. And I just wanted this first meeting to be kind of a simpler one. There is a cheat. Yes, there are lots of cheat sheets out there, but I'm just going to straight up teach you the ones you need to know, and also teach you how you can learn new commands. Because cheat sheets are great, but to be honest, you don't want to walk into your job and have a cheat sheet sitting next to you telling you the commands that you need to know. So let's go ahead. Let me grab Visual Studio Code. So whether you're on, let me actually, at this point, I'm going to jump back to Windows just to make sure it's still alive, but they'll never know if I work from home. Okay, yeah, that's fair comment. But the other thing is you want to use these commands enough. It's not that like you should sit down and spend time like make flashcards and try to memorize what they do. But these are commands you're going to use often enough that they'll just get burned into your muscle memory anyway. Like it's like you don't have to like look. Hopefully you don't have to look at the keyboard every time you type the letter A or something. Hopefully you're able to touch type at least somewhat, because that will help you speed things up a lot. Actually, you're on a Mac. Let me see if I can go back to Windows. All right, I'm going to take it back to Windows just so you can see it from the Windows side again. But at this point, it should look mostly the same. The only thing you're going to see that's like maybe a major difference is the terminal might look a little different. So on Windows, can you see Windows now? You'll have this kind of like colorized one, and you have its 2 lines, whereas on Mac, the prompt is just 1 line, no colors. You can, of course, configure it however you want if you on either one. So the commands for Mac and Linux are the same. Yeah. So at this point, now that we have either if you're on Windows, you have a bash terminal open, or if you're in Mac, you have the Z shell. Z shell has a couple of extensions on top of bash, but they're largely the same. So bash is just, it's not necessarily a programming language, although it does have some features that are like a programming language. It's just your commands that you can use to do simple different things in your file system. So like we've already kind of discussed some of them, like we have git, right? So git is a command you can run. If you want to check the version, you can do this -- version. One trend you're going to see with a lot of commands is you have what's called flags. So some flags, there's basically 2 standard ways to do flags. You can either have, let me see if that works. Oh no, that doesn't work. So on some commands do flags the -- version. So you have -- and then whatever the flag is. And a flag is just something that modifies how the command works. And some use the shorter version where you just have 1 dash and then a letter. So if you look, some of these, some commands are actually, it offers multiple options. So if you kind of check this usage, because I tried to use -v, there wasn't -v. So it's trying to tell me, okay, here are the things you can do. if you look -p, --paginate, -P, --no, -pager, those are all in the same bracket. So that indicates they all do the same thing. So they know some people really want to do this. Some people prefer the longer version because that's easier for them to remember. Whatever you prefer to use, that's fine. Some commands support both, some commands support one, some commands support the other. But just know that kind of modifies. It's called a flag when you have one of those, a dash or a dash before you put something, and just modifies or provides some information to how the command runs. Kind of like a function. If you are in like intro to C or something, you know, if you've done any programming before and used a function, and if you haven't, don't worry about it. But basically, it's a similar sort of idea. You're just trying to provide the command with some information about how you intend to run it. So we'll get into that, not today. It's some future time. But that's one command you can run. If you want to check, let's check if we have npm installed correctly. So we can do npm -- version. Oh, okay. So I must have not gotten npm to install correctly in here. Let's see if I have Node. Oh, did I not finish running the installer? Oh, you know what I may need to do? So what you may need to do, if you try to run that and you're getting the same error as me, if you restart VS Code, that will probably fix it. There's a comment that I did on the Mac only. I'm pretty sure I ran the Node.js installer on Windows. I remember doing that. Let's try now. Yeah, okay. I just had to restart. So that's something else. When you're installing software, a lot of times in order to get it to like integrate with something, you'll have to restart VS Code. Also, if you're just having issues, VS Code is giving you weird errors and you're not sure why, or if you restart it, that, you know, turn it off, turn it back on, that in terms of computer science, like fixes a lot of things. Yeah, so if you run npm -- version, you should get some version. I'm getting 17.0.3. If you get something different, it's not the end of the world. And then let's check that we have Node installed as well. So same thing. Okay, yes, and we have that. Okay, great. If that's not working for anyone, please let me know in the chat. So that's one flag you can provide. We're going to be using npm and Node a lot in the coming weeks because really, so I guess one question you might be wondering is like, what is npm? What is Node? We're going to be learning a language called JavaScript, which is at this point the most important language in my opinion in the world. It's the language that runs on any web page that you go onto, and it has a monopoly on that at this point. It used to be, if you remember back in the days when you had like something like Adobe Flash, actually it might still be around. I think they keep trying to get rid of it because it's super insecure and has big problems. They keep saying they're going to get rid of it every few years, but eventually they will get rid of it and that'll be gone. Used to have Java applets, if you remember that, and you'd have to like go install Java if you didn't have it. I'm sure people remember when that was a thing. And those were competitors to JavaScript. But at this point, you can see that the number of sites that use them, like when was the last time you went on a site other than cool math games where you needed Flash or JavaScript applets? Like it really, those have declined massively in popularity, and JavaScript by far has just completely taken over and dominated. So that's why JavaScript originally started out in the browser as like the big language for making a website. But because it became so popular in the browser and so many people learned it for that reason, that people started to branch it out to other areas as well. So Node is a way to just straight up run a JavaScript file on your local machine. So instead of only having it being on a website, just like you can do like GCC, or if you haven't programmed before, that's fine. But just like you can run, for people who have, you can run Python or GCC on your local machine and run code straight in your local machine. Node is how you do that for JavaScript. It's a JavaScript runtime for your local machine. It's commonly used with servers, but you can also just use it to run programs locally. So we're going to be using that a lot in the coming days. NPM stands for the Node Package Manager. So it started out as a way for Node developers. So people use Node.js on servers a lot. And people who use servers wanted to be able to install packages to do fancy things. For programming, a lot of times you want to use something called a library. And a library is just code somebody else wrote that does something cool. So if you want to, like, for example, maybe you want to be able to, download an image or something. and you need a library. You might need a library for that, or you want to be able to display a map or something. You might need a library for that. Node or npm is the way to install those packages. So you'll grab a package or a library. That's what the P is, right? So npm, you're installing packages, or you can uninstall packages too. That's why it's the Node Package Manager. It doesn't just install, you can uninstall, manages the different packages you have installed. But it started out on the server. It was a way to install other people's code that was useful. But it's grown to, at this point, people use it also for website JavaScript. So it's not so much only for Node anymore. It's also for like JavaScript in the browser as well. So at this point, you can just kind of think of it as the JavaScript package manager. It's just how you get other people's useful code downloaded if you're using JavaScript. And most other languages will have something similar. So if you use Python, you have something called pip. And it works in mostly the same way. So that kind of concept. Also, if you remember, if you're on Mac OS or you were just watching at that point, and Homebrew is a package manager. It's not necessarily for a specific programming language, right? Just for general software, but that's what a package manager is. And so if you kind of learn, I guess that's one reason why I probably do prefer to use Homebrew, just because it's very familiar to me, because I'm used to using a lot of these command line package managers, and you will be too in the coming weeks. So those are those commands. Some more common commands you might want to know for your terminal. Clear is a very helpful one. I use it all the time. You'll see me like, this is basically muscle memory. When I start to get to the bottom and I want to go back to the top, you can just hit clear and that will clear all the space. Some other ones that are very, very common. LS, it stands for list. That will list all of the folders in all the files in the folder that you're currently in. So if you're on Windows, I don't believe it does this. Oh no, it does. On Mac, it shows this as well. You might see that little like tilde character. Like if you take in Spanish, that's a tilde, right? That little wavy line. That represents your home directory. So that will contain like, and if you look, it actually contains a lot of the folders. If you open, like, let's say we open our file explorer right here. So if we go to this PC and local C, users, whatever your username is, boom. This directory right here, this is the home directory. If you look, it's all the same things. If you see, here's 3D objects. Windows Explorer hides some things from you that your command line will show you. But for the most part, you'll see all the same things. Desktop. Okay, so that's how you can see all the files you're in. I rarely actually use a graphical file manager. I mostly just rely on LS to show what you can see. So that we have all that. I'm going to go ahead and make a nighthacks folder. I recommend you do this too. Don't just put everything in your main directory because it becomes impossible to find anything. So that kind of introduces us to our next command. If you type mkdir. So one thing about these commands is back in the day, people were really lazy. I mean, even programs today are still really lazy. And so they like to make commands as short as they can. So like ls stands for list and mkdir stands for make directory. A directory is just a folder. So you'll hear me use those interchangeably a lot. If I say directory or folder, that's the same thing. Something else you hear, I call this is called like a terminal, but I also will call it a shell a lot because bash actually stands for born again shell. And Z shell, the ZSH stands for the Z shell. So yeah. I call it a terminal or a shell, but it just means the terminal. Terminal, shell, same thing. Directory, folder, same thing. It's just some of the terminology that you'll get used to over time. Okay, so if you want to make a folder, you just type mkdir and then the name of the folder that you want to make. Don't put any spaces in it because if you do, it will interpret that as two different commands. Like it'll probably, let's see what that did. I think it will make two folders, but yeah. So it actually interprets this as two different things. So it's thinking, oh, you want to make a folder called night and a folder called hack. So if you look, when I run ls to show what's folders, there's the night hacks folder that we made before. And then here's a folder called hack and a folder called night. So generally you want to avoid spaces in anytime you make any file name or folder, you want to avoid spaces because it has all kinds of issues with the shell. But if you really, 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 really want to do it, you can. There are ways to do it. The easiest way is just to surround it in quotes. So if you must, you can do that, and you will see it will let you make a night hacks directory. Okay, now delete those folders. Yes. Okay, so if we want to get rid of these, you have the rmdir command. So rm stands for remove, and then dir still stands for directory. So if we want to remove, like let's get rid of the hack. Something else is useful. If you hit the up arrow, it will grab your previous command. So I'm very lazy. I rarely type a full command out. And there's some different, one other thing you can use is tab completion. I'll show you that in a minute, which can help speed things up a lot. But let's go ahead and delete the night folder as well. And then let's delete the night hacks folder. So when you delete the night hacks folder, you're going to have to surround it in quotes again. But what you can do is at any time, and this is like one of the best features of using the terminal. If you hit tab, it will try to guess the remainder of what you need. And it tends to be very good at doing this. So I usually just spam tab all the time, hoping that it will guess what I need. And if it doesn't, you can always backspace. But that's why, like, I would never want to actually type that all out. I'll type the first few letters to get it in the ballpark, and then just hit tab a couple of times. And then it will finish it. So yeah, that's super useful. Get used to spamming tab when you're in the terminal for commands that are not short, especially for file names. Okay, so now if we run ls again, we can see that we got rid of all our folders, except we still have our night hacks here, which is what we want. Now, the next thing you might be wondering is, okay, how do you like click into a folder, right? If you want to go, if we actually check, just like you would do a double click. So let's double click through some things, go back to where we were. Right, so just how you might double click into a folder to go like into that folder. You can use the cd command. And you might be like, okay, what does that stand for? CD stands for change directory. So remember, directory is folder. So if you want to change the folder you're in, you can type cd and then the folder you want to go into. Let's see. Does rmdir still work if you have stuff in your directory? No, it will warn you. So like, for example, I'm just going to make a file. So you don't need to worry about this command. This rarely comes up. But if you just want to make a file, I'm going to do touch file. So now if we run ls, you see how there's a file, right? A file called file inside of our night hacks folder. Oh, you also want to notice, at least on Git Bash here, I think it does on Mac as well. It shows you what folder you're in. So we're in our home directory, right? tilde, and then we're inside of the night hacks folder. If we want to go back, the easiest way to go, if you want to go back just one, you can type cd ... just means to go back one folder. So you can do that and go back. The other thing you can do is if you're, let's go back to night hacks again. If you just type cd from anywhere, it will take you back to your home directory. So if you type cd with nothing else, that'll just take you straight back to your home directory. If we try to run rmdir on night hacks, it will not let us. Fail to remove night hacks directory not empty. So yeah, it will only let you remove an empty directory. I'll show you how to remove one that has stuff in it, but one thing you could do is just remove all the files from it and then do rmdir. Let me check chat to see if there's any other questions people had. Okay. Why did you have to include the / when you're removing the night hacks directory? Are you talking about like this right here? Yes. Okay. You don't. But one way that you can kind of differentiate, the shell will usually auto insert that for you because that's how it can differentiate between a file and a folder. So let's say you had a folder called night hacks. Actually, I don't think it'll let you have a folder and a file called night hacks. But the / that / indicates that it's a folder, whereas if you just had a regular file, then you wouldn't have the /. All right, let's see. Yeah, okay. So that's that. So we know how to change directories. You can change around to go to different things. Oh yeah, you can also tab after cd, but it gives you way too many options. So let's go back into night hacks. You can do ls to see what files are in your folder. You can do cd ... to go back a folder. If you want to remove a file, So if you're in the command line, you want to remove some. So let's go back to nighthacks and let's say you're right. I just decide I want to get rid of file here. You can just type rm and then the file name. So just like you can use rm-dir to delete a folder or a directory, you can just use regular rm to delete a regular file. Oh, there's a comment. Okay, he was talking about the space character. I'm not sure what you mean by that, but was there a space character in the end of this line? I don't know if there was or not. Regardless, if you have extra spaces at the end of your commands, it usually doesn't do anything. So it shouldn't care about that. So if we type that, it will delete it. One thing to notice about this though, is it does delete it like forever. So there's no recycle bin. The command line's very efficient and it doesn't waste time putting things in the recycle bin just to delete them again later, right? It's like double the work. So it tends to it just assumes that you know what you're doing. And if you do type rm on something, it's gone forever. So be careful when you're using rm. You can easily delete, your homework, whatever you're currently working on. This is another good reason to use version control. So you can roll back to a version where you haven't deleted anything. That's always good. But be careful with rm. You can also, if you want to delete a folder that does have things in it. So I'm going to make file again. So if you look, okay, file is back, cd ... to go back one. Let's say I want to get rid of the nighthacks folder, but I know there are things in it. If you do rm-rf and then the folder, it will delete that folder and everything inside of it. So yeah. And if you see that -rf, that's going back to the idea of the arguments again, or the flags, right? So the -rf, those are two different flags. And if you want to see, a lot of times, if you want to learn about a command and what flags you might have, like say you were trying to figure this out and you didn't know what to do. If you type a command like rm and then --help, a lot of times it will print out some help. So you can see it print out a whole bunch of stuff. We can kind of scroll back and see. So you can see I used -f for force, and this will ignore non-existent files, never prompt. You probably shouldn't use that. You probably are better off not using the F, but I just have a bad habit of using it. But in this case, the main one that we were using is this -r. And what that does is removes directories and their contents recursively. And what that basically means is it'll remove, so if I do rm-r nighthacks, it'll remove nighthacks. And for each file or folder in nighthacks, it will remove that. And if any of those folders have more folders in them, it'll remove those, all the way down. And if you notice, it actually shows you can also use -R or --recursive. So maybe the -R just doesn't stick for you, but --recursive makes more sense. That's fine. You can totally do whatever folder you want. So that's another option as well. Something else, this is super helpful. So if --help doesn't work, some commands --help will not help you, unfortunately. Sometimes if you type man before a command, that can help. That can give you the manual page, right? So man is just short for manual. So this will pull up the manual page for RM. Of course, sometimes that doesn't work. So usually between help and man, one of them will have the information you need. So give both of those a shot if you want to try to use the command in like some different way or something isn't working, you're just trying to figure out how the command works. That's a great way to do it. Or of course, there's always Google. I'd strongly encourage you all to, whenever you run into issues, first try Googling them. Because that's how, in computer science, that's just how you learn a lot of things. If you Google, because there's so many different issues you run into. You can always, reach out to me or other people on the Discord, but there's a fair chance we may have never even seen the error you're running into. We can try to guess what it is, but there's a fair chance we've never run into it ourselves personally. But the chance that no one on the internet has ever run into it is relatively smaller. So usually the internet's a good place to go for that. All right. My favorite Git command is Git. Okay, someone says their favorite Git command is Git blame. Yes, we probably won't touch too much on Git blame because hopefully you're not getting to the point where you need to blame other people on your project for what you've done. But you know, maybe I may have some time for that. All right, yeah, at this point, I'm just gonna go ahead and take questions because that's all I wanted to get through today. I know usually we'll run probably about 2 hours, so probably till about 9:30, but I know people want to follow the election and do other things. And I just want to make sure that we had plenty of time for questions and debugging. It seems like things have gone pretty smoothly, but if anyone had any issues throughout this installing this or running any of these commands, you know, you couldn't get it to work correctly, let me know in the chat or in Discord afterwards if you're not comfortable putting in the chat, and I can help you get things installed. So yeah, with that, I'm going to open up the floor. Are there any questions? All right, so our first question is, so you can use Git to recover files directories that were accidentally deleted. Yes, so it works a lot like the best way to think about it is like a more manual version of Google Drive. So you know how in Google Drive you can, if you're in a file, like a doc, for example, you can click the all changes saved in Drive. Maybe you haven't used this before, but you click that all changes saved in Drive, and it'll show you several versions that previously existed. That is basically exactly how Git works. So if someone has made, you know, terrible changes, or you deleted a file by mistake, you can use Git to roll back. Another that doesn't happen as much. Like, as long as you're careful with RM, usually you don't delete too many things by mistake. Mainly what happens is you're like running some code, you make a bunch of changes, and then something stops working. You can't figure out why, and you really just want to go back to the last version, like a version you know was working. If you don't use Git, right, your only hope is to kind of spam undo and hope you can undo back far enough, which undo only goes back so far, right? In some programs, once you save, you can't undo. So, but Git always remembers. Git will let you roll all the way back to the very first time you ever used anything on your project. And so that's why it's useful. All right, what is Git blame? LOL. In the context of version control, it sounds out of place. Well, so one thing that's useful about Git, just like Google Drive, Git lets you collaborate with other people, and through using GitHub. So we will definitely have a workshop on that and touch on how you do that. Git blame shows you who wrote every single line of code in the project. So say there's a bug in your project, or something doesn't work right, or you're just reading the code and it makes zero sense to you. And you're like, I wonder who wrote this code, so I can go yell at them, ask them for help, whatever, right? You can just type git blame on the file that you want to see, and it will show you exactly who wrote that code. And then you can go blame them, ask them for help, but you don't have to use it for blaming. And it's not like, I will say this, if you're running like a good project, you know, if you have good leadership and, you know, you're working together, you shouldn't be running git blame very often, right? You got to communicate and not blame each other. So major projects aren't using git blame a lot, but it does happen in like huge projects, like something like the Linux kernel, for example, where you have millions of lines of C code. There are hundreds of people who contribute to the Linux kernel every year, and most of them don't know each other personally. So there's a very fair chance you'll come across code that maybe you don't understand or whatever, and you want to talk to the person who originally wrote it. Git blame, you can run git blame. It'll show you the name and email of the person who wrote the code, and you can reach out. And that's like a really cool feature for collaboration that Git has. Whereas if you just had normal files, you know, no way could you do something like that. Okay, Nathan says infinite RAM. I think you were talking about how it's possible that Git has like an unlimited undo. It's not actually RAM, it just saves it to your hard drive. But basically the way Git works, if you're curious, is it stores the very first version of the file. And then whenever you update, it only stores the changes that you made. So that's how it's able to store all of that forever and ever and ever. It doesn't actually store the entire file over and over and over, because that would quickly use up lots of space. It just stores what changes between versions, which helps keep it compressed. All right. There's a question: is there a git command for rolling back? Yes. And if you're curious about using, I notice a lot of questions about Git. If you're curious about learning a lot of the Git commands you can do, I have like a very intro Git workshop on the Night Hacks YouTube channel. And you can always, of course, reach out to me on the Discord as well and ask questions about Git. I love to talk about Git. And we will do a Git workshop probably during this series at some point in the future. But yes, that is one of the main reasons you might want to use Git is you can roll back. All right. I didn't know that it only tracked changes though. Yeah, wow, wow, cool beans. Yes, it's actually the same guy who wrote the Linux kernel actually wrote Git because he didn't like any of the other solutions for keeping track of his versions of his code. So he took 2 weeks out of his job and wrote Git, and that's how we got it. It's actually it's less than 20 years old. It was like 2000 something when he invented it, and by now you have some other version control systems as well. Subversion, Mercurial are a couple of them, but they work these days. They work a lot like Git. Git is really the gold standard. If you know that one, for the most part, that's what everyone uses. It really is great. All right. If we don't have any other questions, then I'm going to go ahead and shut things down for today. It was great getting everything installed, and now that we all have kind of a common environment, we'll be able to move forward next time. Next time, we're going to be talking about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Kind of how does the web actually work? How can you start to write like a website? So that's what we're going to cover next time. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing. All right. Have a good one. Go watch the election or whatever else you guys are doing.